You might want to wrap it up in a couple of days.
Yeah, why is that?
The last place you want to be is cooped up with a dozen Norwegian guys.
Hello and welcome to What the Flick, everybody. This is the special Only Fat Beardo program. I'm Matt Atchity, editor-in-chief of Rotten Tomatoes. To my left, Alonso Duralde of The Wrap and the Linoleum Knife podcast. Definitely download and listen to that.
There you go.
Today we're going to be talking about The Thing, not the 1982 John Carpenter movie. This is the 2011
prequel to the John Carpenter movie, which was a remake of the 1951 Howard Hawks produced The Thing from Another World. So basically, you remember how at the beginning of the John Carpenter The Thing, there's that dog and the helicopter and the Norwegians? Well, now we get to find out the backstory about the Norwegians and the dog and the helicopter and all that stuff. Mary Elizabeth Winstead plays a scientist who is called in at the last minute to rush down to the Antarctic, where they have made an extraordinary find, and of course they find it and people start getting et up. Take a look.
We estimate it's been here 100,000 years.
That's not possible. This thing attacks its prey. Copies it perfectly. And then hides inside it. Not all of us are human.
I have to say it gets very confusing when we were referring to this movie versus the 1982 version.
Yeah,
because
why
they're both
called The Thing. That seems a little lazy, but you know.
So, what did you think?
I was really surprised at how much I liked it. Actually, I think it's funny. It's not as good as either of the previous things, but I think it cobbles together the best elements from each of them. So, like the John Carpenter one, you have the great gore, you know, and they really kind of do that up with the monster this time, but the idea of the monster like turning itself into people, I think, was less effective in the Carpenter movie because the Carpenter characters don't really have distinct personalities. So they could be taken over by an alien or not, and who would know? Because you don't really know who they are anyway. So in the original, the Hawks produced movie, and some say Hawks directed, you know, very interesting characters and women characters and you know, interesting dialogue and cool suspense. Didn't have the special effects to make for the cool monster. You have James Arness running around in the carrot suit or whatever. So I think that in a way, this thing actually is the best of both films without being as good as either of them. But that's still okay. It's still pretty effective and I think worth seeing.
Yeah, I agree with you on the characterization. I think that one of the things that this movie does that the 1982 version doesn't really do is that you get a little bit more of a sense of paranoia, because they do show a lot of these Norwegian crew, you know, drinking together and they're friends and they're all buddies and
they can speak to each other
and they can speak to each other.
Let the Americans know.
And in Carpenter's version, there's less of that. Like all these guys, like they're all kind of like manly men, and you don't feel that any of them are that close, and so you never really feel like they all kind of keep each other at arm's length anyway.
Right. So it's not like this big betrayal if it turns out one of them is actually going to eat your face.
Whereas this one, you know, it is a little bit more disturbing that the monster is hiding behind them. I did like this. I like this a lot. I didn't think that this is a particularly necessary prequel.
Sure.
But I did like some of the touches that they put in, you know, the John Carpenter music riffs, you know, and it really is exactly what happens.
Ennio Morricone did the Carpenter. I know, you always think Carpenter does all his music, but Morricone did the 82
Oh, I hadn't realized that.
Score.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I like this. You know, I like that this is the story of what happened to the Norwegians. This was great. You know, I think that it lacks a little bit of the newness. I think that, you know, I think that the bleakness that happens in Carpenter's version, that it's just so, you know, again, bleak. So just, you know, this a hard story in the original one. I think that that's in this, but since we've seen that before, it doesn't really break any new ground.
Yeah, I mean, because it's a prequel, but it's really kind of hitting all the same beats
Right.
as the Carpenter one. So it's almost a remake, but
Right.
it takes place before. It's
I
a
guess
weird...
the point I'm trying to make is that there's nothing new here.
Yeah, no, definitely. And they're marketing this as from the producers of Dawn of the Dead, of that remake. And I don't think this one takes the quantum leap that the Dawn of the Dead remake does.
Right.
Where the Dawn of the Dead remake takes this movie that you would think is this sort of sacred cow of horror and really does fun stuff with it and makes it exciting and interesting and scary. And, you know, I think both films work independently. This one, not so much as far as stepping away
Right.
from the Thing legacy, but not bad. And among most of the horror remakes we've seen in the last decade or so, I'd say one of the better ones.
My feeling on this movie, I'm going to go off on this weird tangent here, is that, you know, sometimes you'll hear a band that you really like cover some song that you really like, and you
Right.
think, "Oh, I really want to hear this band's unique take on that song." And when they do something that is almost exactly the same version of the original
Right,
song,
like, what was the point?
You're like, okay, well, I guess that's all right, but I kind of wanted to hear something new. That's what I would have liked to have seen here, something
Sure.
really new with the idea of the Thing, of the monster, and we get basically the same movie, which it's competently made. It's not bad, but
Yeah.
it doesn't. It's not essential.
I agree. It is as a film, you know, I didn't feel disappointed or angry at it, but I also didn't feel like, whoa, they've really turned this around and
Right.
found some interesting things. So, you know, so yeah, see it. Why not?
Okay, so your score?
I'm going to give a 6.8.
All right, I'll make the math easy. I'm going to give it a 6.6. So
Okay.
that brings us to a 6.7. Definitely recommendation.
Sure.
If you like horror movies, we should talk that the effects are pretty good.
They are.
They're not the wonderful practical effects that we saw in the first
Yeah,
one.
but as CG effects go, they don't look fakey, and there's some scary stuff in
Yes,
there.
and
a lot
definitely
of,
gross.
You know, how's it doing on the tomato meter?
Tomato meter, disturbingly low, actually. It's about 34%, and that's much lower than I think it should be.
All right, well, decide for yourself.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much.